He and his family reside here in Jackson. Please welcome Vaughn Gordon.
Mic check. Ooh. With that kind of applause, it's downhill from here, right? Thank you all for being here. For time's sake, I want to get us rolling. I want to invite to the stage LeJune Montgomery Tabron, who is the president and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, with very deep roots in Mississippi, and New York Times bestselling author Wright Thompson, who will join me on the stage. So we've got microphones and we've got water, and we're going to have some conversation. I am really excited about this for a couple of different reasons. But before I get into that, we want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So these are two amazing panelists, both with roots in Mississippi, which we are all very proud of. LeJune is going to be with us for as long as she can. Unfortunately, and she may choose to say more about this, but she does have a flight to catch, and we've got to make sure she catches it for a couple of different reasons. But before she does leave, I want to just thank you, first of all, for the work that you lead with the foundation and for the impact that work is having all across the state of Mississippi. We know you've been here a few days. We had a wonderful conversation last night that the mayor led, and just an amazing room of changemakers here in Mississippi. So we have gotten a lot out of you in the time you're here. And the people in the room who know me, like a good conversation is like wind under my sail. So we're going to task some of your team members with making sure I get you out of here, because otherwise, between right now, we're going to roll.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here.
So this is, there's so much that we could talk about. It's very difficult to narrow it, but hard history is something Mississippi has a lot of. Wright's book, The Barn, tells in a really powerful way, in some new ways, one of the most tragic stories of Mississippi history. And LeJune, your book, aside from being just a very important, powerful personal narrative, and also an instruction guide of sorts about how we move forward, it also captures a lot of the national history that we need to heal from. So to ground us, as I always think we should do when Emmett Till comes up, I want to share the one reading, if you will, for this. And this is a passage from The Death of Innocence, which is a book Mamie Till Mobley wrote with Christopher Benson. One thing about the Bryant and Milam version that is striking: Milam boasts about killing Emmett to teach him a lesson, and also to send a message to others. Whatever happened in that store in Money, whatever was said to have happened, whatever grew out of the imagination of people who told the story over and over again, the fact remains that Milam saw it as his duty as a white man to send that message. And sending a message to black folks is one of the key factors that distinguishes a lynching from a murder. When it comes to a lynching, it is not just the actual killers who are guilty. It is the dominant culture, the entire society that permits such a thing, that encourages it. Bryant and Milam were not the only guilty parties in the lynching of my son. Witnesses have pointed to at least 6 or 7 people. But in a way, there were so many thousands more people who were responsible, powerful, influential. People who could have chosen to lead and chose instead to incite. People who could have condemned hate crimes and chose instead to condone them. people who could have come clean and chose instead to live the rest of their lives with blood on their hands. When we talk about healing, I think it's really important to name some of the harm. And Mamie Till Mobley made the greatest sacrifice. And so I want to honor her by bringing that into the conversation. LaJune, you've got family roots here. Tell us how you learned of the death of Emmett Till.
So I think the question itself evokes for me a healing journey that my family has been on. And I would say has been on because we continue. But my parents were born in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And I say by way of Mound Bayou because of my Montgomery legacy that starts with Isaiah T. Montgomery and his founding of Mound Bayou, Mississippi. But my parents, from your story, were those who left. They left and moved to the city of Detroit, which is where I was born. And it was interesting about their healing process. They chose not to talk about the past. Their pain was too difficult to speak about. So when they were in Detroit, it was like a whole new beginning. My parents never spoke about the pain or the experience in Mississippi other than the joy of family. So we didn't have those conversations. We talked about progress. We talked about the importance of education. We talked about moving forward, which I'm 9 of 10 children, and 8 of us are college educated, and that was the importance of our family. The interesting thing is I learned about Emmett Till as part of Black History Month in the city of Detroit, where we also learned about Martin Luther King and all of the other great leaders. And the interesting thing that I remember is as I understood and learned about Emmett Till, it was the first child that I learned about. All of these other heroes were men. They were the abolitionists, those who were leaders and fighting. The fact that it was a child has always struck me because I couldn't reconcile that at the time as a child. And I couldn't understand how a child would have been caught up in the struggles of inequality of the time. So Emmett Till has always played an important role for me because he was being a child. You know, whistling as a child is something that many children do. I do it a lot. I can't sing at all, but I can whistle. And so to have that in my memory, that ended up being something that was considered bad, has always struck me. But it's part of the pain that we all carry as we go through this healing process. And that shows me that even my parents hadn't fully healed from their journey.
Wow. Right, your roots are 9 miles, right, from where the Junes are.
Yeah, my mother is from Shelby, which is 2 towns over from Mound Bayou.
How do you remember learning about Emmett Till?
You know, the things she talked about, the sort of protective silence of things. I mean, I remember in 1982 when Robert Clark was running for Congress, my dad was one of the main people running his campaign, and so they burned a cross in our front yard in Clarksdale. And my parents didn't wake me up. My dad just went out with the garden hose and put it out. And They decided they were not going to wake me up. It was gone by the time I got up the next day to go to school. My dad knew who did it and never told me, and it wasn't until much later. And the reason was because I went to St. George's Episcopal Day School, and the daughter of the guy who would burn the cross was in my class. And so their choice was to not talk about it. I didn't know about Emmett Till's murder until I got to a History of the New South class at the University of Missouri. It was, and the thing you talked about, like, I've learned obviously a lot about this, but like, this was a child and had just turned 14. He really liked comic books. His mother and her friends laughed because they had heard him and his friends playing Spin the Bottle at his 14th birthday party just before they went south to Mississippi. And so, like, when you try to hold the picture of Emmett Till in your mind, he was that exact age of boyhood where you are kind of maybe interested in maybe kissing a girl, but you still like Spider-Man. And, in a storage unit in Chicago right now, Mamie's family, they still pay for this every month because in this storage unit is his toy train.
Wow.
And museums want it, they want to put it, but they can't bring themselves to let it go. And so, the silence comes from bad places and from good places, but there's a real omerta. And like, I use that word intentionally about a lot of this, where it's like, let's just not talk about it, which I understand the impulse, by the way, but I mean, there's that.
So LeJune, first of all, let me just say, I hope we can have more Black History months in school. Your book, How We Heal, is personal, but it is also a prescription of sorts. Talk a little bit about that prescription, why it's necessary, and I also want to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the work that this team of people here help support, and folks in the audience is doing that is already helping in that process. Yes. Talk about some of that.
Thank you, and I'll try to be brief and summarize, but the Kellogg Foundation was created by Will Keith Kellogg, and he left with us to do whatever we can to promote the health, happiness, and well-being of children. And he wanted all children to thrive, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of race, nationality. That's all he said. Make sure that all children thrive. So our work for almost 95 years has been about how do we open up opportunities? How do we provide pathways for all children to thrive regardless of their circumstances? And that's been our journey. And we came to wanting to think about racial equity as the way of ensuring that we could see every child, regardless of their physical characteristics, their religion. We wanted every child to be seen and thought of as a child with promise and a child that can thrive. So we wanted that equity, but as we thought about it, you can't just mandate that. That isn't a law. That's not a policy. It's a human instinct. It has to come from the heart. So the healing part is how you bring people back together to connect around our common humanity. And through healing, you can then create pathways for all children to thrive. So the healing part of the work, I think, is the part that's the hard part, right? Mm-hmm. That is the part where we as humans come together and learn, because we have been structurally separated. And through that separation, we don't understand others. We don't have the empathy necessary to understand that circumstances may be very different. So our work around healing is about building relationships with people across their differences, building trusting relationships, relationships that are about our common humanity and our common wants and dreams for our children and our family. And once we can have a space, a safe space where we can dialogue and talk through our stories and use those stories as a way of an opening to one's humanity, that through that storytelling we can then reach a place where we know one another, we trust one another, and we can work together. And we can create systems that work for all of us. And so that's the work of healing. And we do this work globally, internationally and globally. And when you talk about the work here in Mississippi and our team sitting here, I'm just, I'm humbled, but I'm honored, because when we do work in communities, we make a commitment for at least a generation. And we do that because we know that this work is hard, and we know that it takes time, and we're not imposing mandates on our grantees and our partners. And we can sit side by side with you and take the same healing journey that you're taking, because we know that we need it also. And so you mentioned yesterday I was in a room with our grantees, and it was kind of a conversation about the work that's been happening. And it's been several decades for our work in Mississippi. And to hear the hope and the joy and the promise of their work and how they speak about progress through their own words and their own aspirations, it just makes me just so honored to lead an organization with a team of such amazing people who can build the kind of healing relationships and community that moves the needle for the children we care about.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to point out, as I said, the book is amazing. One of the adaptations we're having today is that, unfortunately, you won't be able to be a part of the signing, but the book will be available for folks here who need a copy of it. And I guarantee you, for those of you who have not read it, when you read it, you will have a lot of pride in this person with Mississippi roots. I want to call you a fellow Mississippian, but we'll give you another decade.
Mississippi is my second home. Okay. And I apologize. I don't know if you all can see this bandage on my hand, but unfortunately last week I had this very freak accident that ended up with stitches and a pretty significant cut. So I haven't been using my right hand, and while we were scheduled to sign about as many books as we could, I am right-handed, and I can't quite write my name as pretty as I would like with my left hand. But I guarantee you there will be a way for you to have a signature on your book in the future.
We definitely don't want you to use an auto pen. That's creating a lot of...
Yeah, I've been doing speak to text. If you could speak to sign, I would try it.
I'm sorry. It's the last one. So I just want to say, I want to follow up with you, Wright, but I also want to say, Ms. Lejeune, in case the staff throws that hand up, we want you to be able to slip out without feeling the stress or anxiety of this. We're family here. Wright, talk about this healing piece.
I mean, it's interesting. We're from so close from this. I mean, I'm from Clarksdale. Your parents are from Clarksdale. John's from Clarksdale. I think it's funny because, I'm looking right now. This is the North Toward Home will be 60 years old in 2 years. Like, people have been writing this story about healing in Mississippi for a really long time. And it's interesting to me that, it's pretty clear for some segment of the population that the idea of when America was great again was before the civil rights movement. And so, like, separate from debating whether we agree or disagree with that, that's clearly the project. And so, and people talk about the murder of Emmett Till as the start of the civil rights movement. And so in this very strange way, we actually have a date of when America was great, and it is August 27th, 1955. And so, you know, as you talk about the healing, I mean, this is not even past tense yet. I mean, this is, you know, I was standing with Sharon Wright, who's, many of you from Greenwood, you know Mrs. Wright, but her uncle was Moses Wright, who was Emmett Till's uncle, and that's the house he was in the night he was kidnapped. And I was standing with her once on the banks of the Tallahatchie River, which is where they found Emmett Till's body. And I just sort of looked at her and said, what are you thinking about? And she said, I'm just so grateful. And I was like, what? And she said, he got out of the river. And, you know, folks in Tallahatchie County call the Tallahatchie River the Singing River because there have been so many bodies in it, and almost none of those bodies got out of the river. And so, you know, there are a lot of sort of fancy political ways and jargony ways to describe the sort of conflict that we find ourselves in right now, but the simplest way to think about it is there are people who think the country would be better if we could throw him back in the river. And so, you know, that is the thing that we're still healing from. I mean, this is not, you know, this is not Desmond Tutu after apartheid. Like, we're still in it.
Wow. Mr. June, you got to step away, but I've got to ask you this question, and I'm going to just be really, really blunt about it. You are one of a decreasing number of amazing black women in positions of power, leading institutions that can help drive change. Talk just a minute as you exit about courage in leadership in this moment.
First of all, I think the most important sign of courage in a leader is to show vulnerability. And I think if we can be comfortable in being vulnerable in this moment, we can learn some things. And part of that vulnerability is knowing that there are things we all need to learn. You know, acknowledging that, unfortunately, in these days and times, there can be more than one truth at the same time. And acknowledging that through dialogue, we can come to some greater, deeper understanding where people's truth comes from is important, but it takes patience. I always say, you know, when we talk about healing, these aren't transactional conversations. It's not like a 5-minute thing. You have to create the space for that kind of deep learning and understanding, and you have to show up in a very vulnerable place to share and to also acknowledge that you're there to listen and learn. From a leader in my organization, that vulnerability has to show up for our team, for our people who are doing this work on the ground every day. And part of that is admitting at times that we didn't have it all right, and that the journey isn't a straight line. It is volatile, and there are ups and there are downs, and there are moments of disappointment, but there are also moments to celebrate and moments of joy. And where I believe we've taken the organization forward is when we've paused enough to admit the errors and the failures, but yet leaned into those with courage and sought the advice of people in the organization for how we can move forward. And I think, you know, in this moment right now, courage to have a dialogue, to have a deeper conversation, to kind of lean into the place where it gets uncomfortable. And listen and learn is what I think we need to do right now more than ever.
Awesome. Thank you. So I want to just say, as long as you don't have a firearm in your bag, you'll get through TSA here very easily. Thank you. Let's give Mr. June a hand clap.
Thank you all. It was so nice to be here, back at home.
Thank you. So for the rest of this conversation, I promise you, Wright and I won't leave anything left unsaid. Wright, you write at a point in the book, you referred to this time period earlier, 1954, and some of the decisions that were made. There's a point in the book where you say Mississippi, our legislature in particular, made some decisions, or a decision there, that you felt was the point of no return.
There was if you go read you can go newspapers.com and you can read all of the Clarion Ledger, the Jackson Daily News, and the Associated Press coverage of the 1955 governor's election. And it's bananas what people were saying. And it was sort of, the whole race was about school segregation. So these 5 candidates were desperate to sort of prove to the voters that they were the staunchest segregationists. And so they are saying crazy stuff. I mean, a lot of talk about bayonets, like a lot of Civil War imagery. And so this is ratcheting and ratcheting and ratcheting up this election. And the election, because it was the Democratic primary and there was no Republican Party in the state, so the primary was the election. And it was in August of 1955, and the election was on a Tuesday, and Emmett Till went to the store in money less than 24 hours later on Wednesday. There's always been, especially in Mississippi, a real link between political rhetoric and violence. John F. Kennedy gave his speech on civil rights, and the next day, Medgar Evers got shot. I disagree with almost everything he ever said, but like Charlie Kirk got shot. And, what she was just talking about is, you might disagree with everything that guy ever said, but he showed up at a microphone and debated all comers. And that is the very idea of our sort of shared American humanity. And if that is under assault, then nothing else matters. It's already all over. And so one of the things when you read the history of Emmett Till or of anything is that there were moments where people in positions of power in Mississippi had the opportunity to turn the volume down, and in every instance, governed mostly by their own desire not to lose the next election, but in every instance, instead, they turn the volume up. And that is, somebody asked me the other day, what is the legacy of Emmett Till? And there are many legacies of Emmett Till. There is, there's his mother and the bravery of a mother. But there's also the legacy that words said on a political stage, especially here, are deeply, deeply tied to violence. And if the leaders are turning up the volume instead of turning down the volume, then none of the other stuff we're talking about really matters at all. And so it feels like over and over we've had the chance to do that. I mean, the thing that blows my mind in the book is that as you find out, there was a global panic in 1837, and the whole global economy collapsed. All of the southern states had bond issues. Everybody defaulted on all of their bonds. But over the next sort of decade or so, 2 decades, Louisiana paid their debts back, Alabama paid their debts back, Tennessee paid their debts back, Arkansas paid their debts back. Mississippi just didn't want to pay its bills, and so they came up with sort of all sorts of culture war reasons why they shouldn't have to pay this money back. Fast forward to the Civil War ends, Alabama can go borrow money. They have great credit. So they can use that money to build, say, steel mills. And Georgia can borrow money, and Tennessee can borrow money. Mississippi can't borrow any money. And so one of the reasons that there's such systemic poverty here, and why sometimes the water in Jackson doesn't work, the infrastructure problems, it goes back to politicians in 1837 who didn't want to pay their bills. And so we are especially here sort of forever in the gravitational pull of the decisions that people made long before we were born. And, the vital work that she was talking about, that the Kellogg Foundation is talking about, is like, it's somewhat we have to just sit down and say, this is what happened here.
Thank you. Yeah. A hard thing, so as John said, others said, I'm a Delta boy. And I grew up thinking of the story of Emmett Till as a unique Black tragedy. The older I got, the more I understood it as a national, international tragedy, right? And not just a Black story. Talk a little bit, Wright, about what you learned or what principles guided you in writing what you wrote, particularly about the barn. A lot of it was new to many of us. Talk about how you tried to write with fidelity, but also honor your own positionality as a white man of the Delta in writing that story and honoring the people who epigenetically still live with some of the legacy of his death.
I got invited in the middle of doing this to what would have been Emmett Till's 80th birthday, and his family in Chicago had a celebration in Argo Summit. And Argo Summit is where the Argo starch plant is. They make Argo cornstarch, they make Cairo syrup. People call it Little Mississippi. The Argo Temple Church of God in Christ was founded by Emmett Till's family. His cousin, Reverend Wheeler Parker, who comes to Mississippi all the time, who's the last living eyewitness to the kidnapping, is the current minister there at the Church of God in Christ. And so I was in this room and I realized that everybody in the world who was alive who knew him was in this room. And there were probably 12 of them, and there are probably 8 now. They've been dying in front of me. And this really old woman stood up, and it was his Aunt Thelma. And her voice was really quiet. You had to really lean in to hear. And she stood up and said, "I wasn't there the night he died, but I was there the morning he was born." And that was the exact reaction in the room. So you said fidelity. It was fidelity to the people in that room, first and foremost. Without sort of their blessing, I don't think I would have done it. Because it's, and also like, I definitely wouldn't have just written a straight history of the murder of Emmett Till. Like that, we can have a longer debate about that, but that made me really queasy, because that's not my story to tell. This felt like it was, because it's in many ways a history of whiteness in Mississippi. But the main thing for me was, Reverend Parker carries this around every day. I walked with him. Has anybody ever been to the drugstore in Sumner? It's real old-timey. So we walked in there one time, and he looked at me and goes, I got to get out of here, because it felt like the 1950s. And he was just like, I got to get out of here. I went with him. They opened up the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. for us. And we went down, and Emmett Till's casket is there, because when the FBI was going to reopen the case, they had to exhume his body and do a DNA test because the Tallahatchie County jury ruled that that wasn't him. And so if they were going to bring a trial, they had to prove that the body buried in Burr Oak Cemetery was Emmett Till, which of course it was. Simeon Wright, his uncle, was the DNA match. Simeon Wright, he did very well in life, and he always kept in the trunk of his car his golf clubs and his cotton sack. And it was the alpha and omega of it. It was I love that line in the Episcopal liturgy. We do this in remembrance of you. And so it was being faithful to Reverend Parker, and so he saw the coffin and he walked out of that room and he was just making noises. And we started walking up those sort of switchback ramps at that museum. And he said, when he could finally talk again, he said, we just can't let people forget. And so the fidelity ultimately was to that idea.
So, as I said earlier, I do hope we continue to have Black History Months, and I mean that seriously. The reason I think that question is so important is because there are a lot of Mississippians here, and many of them probably come from communities that have stories that maybe they were some of the people who didn't make it out of the river, as Sharon Wright said, right? But those stories are in those communities. They're talked about. And in order for us to go from where we are now to where we need to be, it's going to require some people engaging in those stories of racial violence, but also class and economic tragedies, right? John, somebody missed the memo on the phone, but we got it. We got it squared away.
I think it was John's phone. His ringtone is his brother playing the piano.
That's pretty sweet. For us to move forward, what advice would you give people based on what you learned in this experience about how to go and confront and deal with the history and the communities that they're from, even when there are people who tell us that it's not real?
I mean, any advice, I feel incredibly unqualified to give advice, but...
Okay, well, let me... what advice would you give white people in Mississippi?
There we go.
Who needed to?
Come on now, like you're killing me, man. Like, what you should do... I got some thoughts. No, I'm like... So, look, I think that being afraid of your history is a sign of weakness. I think that, like, I also failed to see how that history in any way actually, like, learning it does nothing bad to me. I mean, we're still on the same land. And I mean, nothing, like, knowing the history cost me nothing and gains me everything. I didn't know lots of the history of the Delta. I didn't know the degree to which Mississippi was functionally a colony of Manchester, Liverpool, and London for a very long time. I didn't really understand the economics. I didn't understand that until 1933, cotton was the most important commodity in the world, and so cotton was oil. So Mississippi was Saudi Arabia. And banks everywhere wanted their 10%, and they didn't particularly care how they got it, and they needed folks like J.W. Milam to get their 10%. And we are all tied together in what's left when a commodity chain moves on from a place. And we have to figure out how to live here together. And, so I don't have any advice except to say that if you can't say, this is what happened here, then none of the other conversations matter. And, like I mean, so like, you know, the rhetorical question, why do you keep bringing this up? And the answer is because no one ever started. And so like, we're still doing that. I mean, you know, new information comes out all the time about this one killing, and this is the most investigated murder maybe in American history, except for Lincoln and Kennedy. And we're still finding stuff. I found 2 people who were at the barn that night after the book came out.
Wow.
Like, I had someone reach out to me and said her grandmother told her that her grandfather was there. And another guy reached out, this old man in the Delta, and said he was there. And so we're still learning things, and this is the most researched lynching in the history of the state of Mississippi, and we still don't know the half of it. And so, you know, there is a project of, you know, there is an ongoing project of, you have to be able to say what happened here, and like that to me feels like the essential work.
Wow. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes, and our organizers might hurt our feelings for this, but I bet we could get a couple of really awesome questions from the audience.
I love it. Do it.
If you will agree to ask short questions, we will agree to give short answers.
There we go. Yes, ma'am.
So seldom do I get to, usually I don't make the cut. My name is Jaribu Hill. I'm a human rights defender and civil rights attorney, and I was privileged to represent a portion of the family of Emmett Till. Deborah and Terry Watts were petitioners in a petition that I filed for writ of mandamus to try to get Carolyn Bryant arrested because there was an active warrant, probable cause statement, and a capias that named her, along with the others, Milam and Bryant. It was said back in the day that she would not be arrested because the sheriff said he didn't want to bother her because she was a woman with children. We saw that play out in real time in the 21st century when elected officials who had the power to make sure that that warrant, which has never expired, a warrant in Mississippi never expires, never was that warrant served, and she died at 88 years old without ever having to suffer the consequences of her role, which led to the abduction that led to the lynching. So my question always is, out of frustration, when are people going to be accountable when they're in positions of power and still shrinking back like cowards when people have elected them to be brave? And by the way, Jaribu, not from the Mississippi Workers Center, just Jaribu saying this.
Yeah. You know, and that's incredible. And also one of the people involved in that is the incredible film director, Keith Beauchamp. And Keith, yeah, like Keith's incredible. It's funny, Keith always talks about, there were 15 people at the barn, and I know Keith really well. And forever I was like, Keith, you're crazy. Like, I can only get to 8. And then the book comes out, and I found 2 more. So like, I've been saying at every book talk, I think I owe Keith an apology. Keith's incredible. I mean, one of the real problems, of course, is that the only person who could testify against Carolyn Bryant was Carolyn Bryant, because everyone else was dead. And so, like, you can give her the microphone back. No, but it's in. Yeah, because. Yeah, no, I know, but like it's like the way that it was explained to me is that it would be it'd be an easy indictment but a hard case to win. But at some point, and I think you'll agree, then that's just the way it goes. You try the case. Like, she's alive, put her on trial. And you know, because I mean, by the way, I mean, she absolutely lied about Emmett Till. She said he said all sorts of stuff he couldn't say because he has a stutter. Her story changes because you can watch her lawyers write her testimony for her. And so like the notes from the lawyers meeting are different every time, and you can watch that story be cooked by the defense counsel. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And then, but like, it's just like, and Moses Wright always thought she was in the truck that night. And Moses Wright he was smart. He didn't want to accuse a white woman of murder in Mississippi. So what he said was, she had it was someone with a voice that was lighter than a man, is how he did it. He's really smart. But a lot of people believe she was in the truck that night to identify him.
One more question.
Let's get, yes, please.
Okay.
Hey, great question.
Okay. Stand up.
At one point in the book, Wright, you say that in the history of the United States, there's 4 or 5 times since the Civil War where African Americans came to white people wanting integration and white people turned their back. So I wonder how you see the bridge between reconciling in the community and like national scale, because the bad history is in both places.
Thank you.
Well, right, you're the New York Times bestselling author.
Oh, that's how.
I haven't thought on that.
That's how you're gonna. I mean, I'm doing the most dangerous thing in the world, which is thinking out loud with a microphone. No, but I don't know. I mean, I can't. Doesn't feel great right now. This has been a bad week, and I guess I'll say this. I think we're at a crossroads. I don't know which way we're going to go. I don't know if, it's a 249-year experiment. And we'll see if we hit 250. I don't know the answer to that question.
I have a response. I don't know that it's an answer, but I will tell you, I think we're here and we're all we have. So we're going to have to make something of it, right? It says the truth, the truth pressed to the earth, will rise. We have to just make sure the truth gets told. We've never controlled the prosecutions, right? So justice is going to have to be something embedded in the community, in the relationships. I mean, y'all know that in Mississippi, we operate on a code where you can embarrass people socially in such a way that they would rather spend 10 days in jail, right? So that is a cohesion in society that I think can be a source of building something new. LeJune Montgomery Tabron has in her book a line that I like it. It rings in my ear, and I think it's important for us to recognize. She says that racism is not the shark, it's the water. What we know about white supremacy and the ill effects of extractive economics, whether you call that unfettered capitalism or whatever, those things are driving the divisions. So if we can develop as a citizenry, as people connected to each other in community in ways that we recognize what those forces are and how deleterious they are for us, then we're going to be all right. If we fail to do that, 3 more people will be sitting on the stage at Galloway, or I don't know, maybe it'll be Musk Memorial Baptist Church or something, and they'll be having a very similar conversation. But we can't quit, because, I come from a long line of black folks who said, we ain't going nowhere. Thank you.
I don't know about tomorrow, but I know that if there is one, we can have hope because of panelists like these. Let's thank them so much.